This is Rodrigo Arancibia from the High Tech High Graduate School of Education, and I'm here to talk to you about EdSpace, a social learning network. Well, what is EdSpace? EdSpace is a place for you to connect and get curious with the people that you want to connect with. But what EdSpace isn't is a popularity contest like Twitter. It's not a place for you to sit and listen and sit and get like YouTube. EdSpace TV is a personal channel for you to do your own vlogging to tell your story about your experiences. Not comfortable with video yet? It's all good. Every single channel is going to have post-it boards. Write your question down on the post-it board and someone will respond to you with a video post. Social media networks are noisy. That's why we created EdSpace filters. On every single channel, you'll be able to drill down on which educators you want to learn from and which educators you want to get curious with. Whether you're a second grade teacher in Arkansas or a project-based learning teacher in San Diego, use the EdSpace filters to find your people and get curious with them. EdSpace has two types of channels. Public channels that everybody can view and everybody can access, and private channels that only teachers from your school can see. Cool thing is, you can also see which teachers from your school site are signed up for EdSpace. So what's next? Introduce yourself. Pin a video to your personal channel and tell us what you're curious about. Tell us what you're working on. Tell us what you're passionate about. The most important thing is that you get started. Show up and share more.
Our next speaker on day one of our conference, focusing on the future of schools, is Karen Adley, a longtime colleague and friend of mine who has demonstrated her depth of understanding and knowledge of education leadership and all things education. Karen is a successful consultant, coach, and facilitator, and she develops innovative and outstanding development programs that have been delivered to schools in 70 countries. Karen has worked with the Ministries of Education of the UK, of the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Kenya. And in her session where she talks about developing leaders who develop people, she asks three core questions. I'm not going to reveal them now, so we hope that you will look at the session and reflect on those questions and how it relates to you as a leader. Enjoy the session, and we hope to hear from you in the reflection on the EdSpace app. Hi, Karen. It's wonderful to have you here with us at the Inspired Conference, and thank you for giving us moments of your wisdom and your years of experience in developing school leadership.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, Marie. I'm delighted to join you. Such an exciting venture. So it's good to have the opportunity to speak with people, to connect with people in this way.
And the advantage is that we can tap into all the experience you've gained training so many people over so many countries, so many continents, and having that wisdom that especially young school leaders definitely can tap into. And especially in these really difficult times, I think the collective experience and conversations and ideas that will be generated from the session will really make people think and give them maybe a new sense of direction. So thank you for bringing that to the conference. So we are going to examine the whole concept of leadership and growing people and growing leaders, which I think you also agree is one of the core responsibilities and of a school leader. So maybe we can just kick off by me asking you, what do you think in your experience makes a good school leader?
Oh, gosh. What a brilliant question. And as you say, I've spent a lot of time working with leaders and trying to help leaders develop skills. When I set up my consultancy, which is quite a long time ago now, over 20 years ago, I searched around for what did I believe was the most important thing that leaders did, which is how I came to the strapline, basically, of the organisation, which is developing leaders who develop people. Because if I thought back to the leaders that I'd had, who had loved and wanted to work with and enjoyed working with them, there was always an element of they'd helped me to develop. And certainly the more I speak with people, that's what they tell me about their best leaders. They help them to develop. They develop skills, they develop classroom practice. And so I do believe that that's the most important thing that a leader does, develop people. But of course, the way in which they do that, there are many and varied ways of doing it. Although we know from research that there's a lot of commonality in what the best leaders do, certainly in what the best school leaders do. We also know that it makes a huge difference, that leadership is second only to what happens in the classroom in terms of the success of a school. If you are judging a school by the success of student outcomes, which of course is what really matters, then we know that leadership makes a huge difference. So that's really key.
That's a great explanation. And in a way, we can also say that leadership in general have many shared competencies and characteristics, or leaders in general, because it's not necessarily that there's a line between what good school leaders do and what good leaders do, because leadership in itself is a very concept that applies generally to leaders, not only to school principals or heads of school.
That's one of the joys of working within the concept of leadership, because leadership is fundamentally about people. So it doesn't really make any difference whether those people are working in an engineering company, they're working in a factory, or they're working in a school. The way that a good leader is, and the way that a good leader makes people feel, is fundamental. And quite often on our programs, we'll spend time thinking about the difference between leading and managing. And not that one is better than the other. They are both necessary, because a leader can't lead unless things are managed and things are orderly and calm, and there are systems and processes which are very much management activities. But we do need leadership as well. And one of the things that I find absolutely fascinating about leadership, and I know you agree with me here because we've spoken about it before, Anne-Marie, is that you don't have to have a title or a status to act as a leader. Leadership is very much a choice of how you are and how you are with other people. So even if you haven't got a label round your neck saying, I'm the boss, I'm the leader, it doesn't prevent you from engaging in very effective leadership behaviours. So it's all about people.
That's so interesting, because sometimes when you look at an organization or a school, people will tell you, find the ones who are the real influencers. It might not always be the head of department or the curriculum leader or the principal for that matter. It is about looking at those people who really influence others. And of course, we're looking at influence in a positive way. But that also really affirms what you'd said at the start. And also what you say, the tagline of your company is, it is all about building people, developing people, growing people. And so often I think teachers don't see themselves as leaders in the classroom, but they are leaders, right? It's not just the title.
Yeah, absolutely, leaders of learning. Just to go back though to when you're saying that some people shape the culture of an organisation or the culture of a department. And we often talk about those in our leadership development. We call them cultural architects, because basically that's what they are. And of course, a cultural architect can be positive or can have a negative impact. So one of the things that I always ask new leaders to do is to have a think about who are the cultural architects within your team. They may not have a position of status or be recognised as a leader, but they are doing the leading. And if there is perhaps a less than positive cultural architect, someone that you might have some concerns about, it's always very good to get that person on your side. So I would work with a new leader, a developing leader, and say, you know, let's think of some ways that we can get that person to come with you. You know, make sure that they're buying into your vision and the direction that you're setting for the team, for the department. So, and of course, if you have a positive cultural architect, they're on your side anyway. So they're good to work with. Following that energy that they radiate can be very, very good, harnessing that and helping everybody benefit from that. So it's good. And it's a good way of looking at, you know, what's going on in the team, looking at who's actually the architect of the culture and who's designing it, really.
That's a great term to use, a cultural architect. And it's just thinking of an architect and the design and the impact that they have. I think if people use that term or think about those influences in that context, that's a great way of thinking about culture in your school moving forward. Now let's look at, again, you know, you spoke about leaders and what makes a good, or a definition of a leader. What do good leaders do in your work and your extensive experience? You have met so many leaders, and I'm sure that over time you've developed a really clear framework of what are those characteristics of good leaders.
Yes, I wish I'd kept account of how many leaders I've worked with. It would have been good. But hindsight's wonderful, isn't it? I wonder if, could I share a screen? Because what I've done is I've put together 1 or 2 slides that might help us as we wander through here.
That will be excellent. Thank you so much. That will, I think, help our audience as well. And I think you've also mentioned that you will be making these slides available in the conference goodie bag. So thank you for that.
Yes, I'm more than happy for people to have the slides, yes, if they're of use. Well, what I did when I started to think about this conversation that we were going to have, Adley, is I posed some questions, questions that I often ask leaders, because just as in a school we want to develop reflective classroom practitioners, we also want to develop reflective leaders. Obviously, I spend a lot of time thinking about leadership, but it's something that I think you really do need to spend time thinking about. So if I just start, I've posed 3 questions. The first one is, how does your leadership make people feel? And in one sense, this is probably the most important thing, because if an individual feels well led, feels that they are being led by somebody who respects them, values them, they're going to have respect and value for that person. And it makes all the difference. If we feel safe in our leadership, we feel comfortable, we feel valued, we are supported, challenged probably as well. But that's what really matters. How does it make people feel? So for a leader to be asking that question fairly continually, how am I making this person feel, I think is a very good reflective question for any leader. The next question that I've posed is, what's the impact of your leadership? What difference does your leadership make? Now, we know that leadership makes a huge difference, but for a leader to be really thinking about what are they adding and how is their leadership making a difference to others, I think is a good reflection for people. And then, in a way, my favourite question, particularly as I have had a long career, I'm having a long career, but it's one that I find, this third question, what do you want your legacy, your leadership legacy to be? I find it's probably the most motivational question in terms of leadership and me as a leader, because I have a vision there of attending a leaving party and listening to what people are saying. Now, I've been lucky enough to attend lots of leaving parties, not necessarily end of career leaving parties, but people moving on to a different organisation. And it's very interesting to hear the conversations. And you know that it's a very effective leader who is moving on from the conversation. You know, often people are saying, I wouldn't be who I am today if he, she hadn't given me the opportunities. This leader's going to be missed. But we know what we're going to do now they've gone. They've set it up well. We've got a succession plan. We know where we're going. We're going to carry on doing all this good stuff that they've put into place. So I think, when I think back about that question, and what do I want my leadership legacy to be to KAA, to other organisations that I work with, it certainly keeps me on my tippy toes to think about, am I leaving something worth leaving? So it's a good question.
These are three very, very powerful questions, Karen. And maybe if you also think about, will people be, in terms of the legacy question, will people be able to carry on with me? Because so many leaders build this whole, the whole organization around them rather than empowering others. And if that is the case, then you have failed as a leader. So those are really, really good questions. And I hope that everybody who's watching this interview would sit back and reflect on those three questions moving forward.
It's interesting that researchers have found that charismatic leaders are not always the most effective in the longer term. They may be able to very quickly make an improvement. People enjoy working with them, but they don't necessarily leave lasting change. Now, I don't want to be critical of charismatic people, because of course some charismatic people manage charisma and establishing long-term change and succession planning, but it isn't necessary to be charismatic. And that's one of the things that I often spend time with groups of young leaders in particular, saying you don't have to be charismatic. You can be a very quiet, self-effacing, calm leader. You can still do wonderful, wonderful things. You don't have to be bells and lights and life and soul of the party to be a leader. Definitely not. The qualities that make a difference are far more than humour. They are often the small things that make the difference. In fact, we're going to have a look at some of those. So if we go on, things we do know about school leadership, we mentioned this earlier. And I think that certainly when we're talking about school leadership, the only way to really define whether or not it is good is its impact on student outcomes. Now, I'm not saying what those student outcomes should be, but they should have been decided within the school. What is this school about? What are the things that are important to it? And then making sure that every student makes maximum progress towards those outcomes that have been defined. So we know that leadership has that impact. And we know that in terms of student outcomes, leadership, and that's not just the top leadership, that's the quality of leadership throughout a school, throughout the organisation, second only to classroom teaching in terms of its impact on student outcomes, which is amazing. But that's great that is the case, and we have very strong evidence that that is the case, so that when leadership is strong, student outcomes are either on the way to being very, very good, or they already are very good, and the reverse doesn't apply. If student outcomes are outstanding, there is a link to leadership. You don't get outstanding student outcomes with poor leadership. So it's, and loads of evidence, very strong research evidence to back that. So if we then go to have a look at what it is then that these great leaders do, and increasingly we've got research from all over the world which is fascinating, and it gives me great joy that actually we can be very clear about what it is that the best leaders do. And year on year, we're getting more and more evidence to back that. So I've identified, I mean, there's any number of things that people actually do, but I've chosen 5 or 6 things that I think are really the most important. And certainly from my recent experience in speaking with schools as we've gone through the pandemic, or we are going through the pandemic, and previously being in schools, these are the things that I'm fairly certain really do make a difference to people. So the first one is that it's about the culture of the organisation, and that culture, when it's good, when it's well designed and well implemented, gives people a sense of belonging. They feel very much attached to the school, to the organisation. They feel they belong there. They feel safe there. And there's a very strong sense of openness and trust within the organisation. Now, that's very easy for me to say, you know, that's what they're like. How do they get like that? That's not easy. And the very best leaders work long and hard at doing this. It isn't something that's going to happen overnight. But there are lots and lots of small research projects and larger research projects that help us understand how leaders build this culture. One of the most interesting things that I've heard recently about a culture of belonging actually doesn't come from a school. It comes from a large multinational company called Wipro. And the study that I'm just going to tell you a little bit about was actually carried out in a call centre in Bangalore in India. But it's so interesting, I think it's worth just thinking about for a moment. This is a case study that Daniel Coyle cites in his book called The Culture Code, and it's a really interesting book which I would recommend to people. So this call centre was a really good place to work. Beautiful modern buildings, lovely facilities, good rate of pay. So, you know, on the surface, a place that anybody would want to work. However, the leaders and managers found that the people were, to quote them, leaving in droves. So they employed several hundred thousands people in this call centre, but lots of them were leaving on an annual basis. So what they did was they had a look at the perks, they had a look at the facilities, the benefits. They gave people an increase in salary, they increased the perks and the benefits, they put in social activities, a whole range of things. And it didn't actually change the turnover. Between 40 and 50% of staff were leaving on an annual basis. And so they called in some researchers and said, what can we do about this? And the researchers said, well, maybe the people don't feel a sense of belonging. Well, they can't actually, because they don't stay that long, so they're moving on. So what can we do to increase the sense of belonging? And they ran an experiment with newly appointed people. So they were appointing, and they had no difficulty in recruiting and appointing people. So they were inducting batches of hundreds of people at a time into this call centre. They split the people into 3 groups. So there was a control group, and they just got the usual induction that had always happened. And then group 1 had the usual induction process, and then 1 extra hour of information about the company, about the star performers in the company, about the awards that the company had won, and how great it was that they'd come to work for Wipro. how lucky these people were. And at the end of the 1 hour additional session, each new employee was given a polo shirt with the logo of the company on and sent away. Off they go. Group 2 also had the standard induction, but they also had another hour. And in this hour, they were asked what they wanted to achieve at Wipro, what Wipro needed to do to enable them to be happy at work and to achieve. They did some activities like if you were lost at sea, what special skills could you bring to help the people at sea? And the 1 hour was basically about the new employees rather than about the company. And then at the end of the session, all the new employees were given a polo shirt with the logo of the company and their own name embroidered on it. And then they sat back and looked at what would happen. So several months later, the researchers checked what had happened to these 3 groups. And they were absolutely amazed at the difference that had been made. So the actual, the figures that they came up with just blew them away. They found that people who had been in group 2, this was the group who'd had the session all about them and what they could do at Wipro, were 250% more likely to still be working for the organisation than the control group or than group 1, which was just not what they expected. They thought they were going to make a difference, but they didn't realise how much difference they were going to make. So they interviewed people and checked out what had happened and decided that it was about what they called belonging cues. So it was about the little cues that they had given to people about this company wants you to belong to it. We want you to be part of this company. And it had made a huge difference. So having been aware of that, one of the things I did recently was induct a new member of staff to my organisation. And I thought, wow, I'm not going to do this the normal way of telling them how great we are. And I spent quite a considerable length of time after the interview process and as part of the induction, asking our new intern, John, what he could do for us, what he wanted, from us and the things that he could bring. And so far, so good. It's going well. He's enjoying being here. But back to what leaders need to do. This sense of belonging, a feeling of safety and a feeling that they are trusted and that they can trust the leader is absolutely key. So that's the first thing. Easier said than done, and it's going to take time, but we really need to go all out to do that.
And I think that is so important because especially in a school environment, a new teacher arrives and so often they just have to somehow through assimilation figure out how does this organization work, but how often are they given that opportunity to give that to really feel listened to and to feel that you can also make a difference. And so often, I'm sure you've seen this as well, staff meetings that are held with the school leader or maybe head of department doing all the talking, and people just don't feel that they have that opportunity to show that A, your opinion matters, and B, that you're part of an organization that values you as an individual. So that is really, really sensible. I just want to ask, before you go on to the second one about the concept of safety, how do you interpret, how does a person feel safe, or what is safety for you in terms of this culture of the culture of the school?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, safety, because there's so many aspects of safety. There's physical safety. Actually, the building is safe. That electricity is safe and all those sorts of things. But there's also safety in terms of emotional safety, you know, not being bullied, feeling safe in that way. And also safety in terms of knowing that you are employed. It's much easier to settle into giving your best if you know you have a full-time contract rather than if you're on a short-term contract. Safety has a lot attached to it. I mean, if we look back to Maslow's hierarchy of need, safety, security is, you know, very, very important in terms of building the pyramid. Yes, okay, people need to be paid, but then safety comes in next, and it is that it's multifaceted safety. So it's emotional safety, physical safety, and safety in terms of tenure of employment that are very, very important. And of course, if we are developing a culture of belonging, safety, and trust for the staff, we know then that they're more likely to take that into the classroom and create a climate in the classroom which is one of belonging, safety, and trust. And it's just as important for all members of the school community. So yeah, worth working on.
That's really important. And another dimension that I've also that's really coming up in terms of innovation is that people should also feel it's safe to make mistakes, because if a teacher feels that they can experiment, they can try things, it might not work so perfectly the first time, but if the teacher feels that there is this room for innovation, they will also allow the students to also feel that it's okay to make mistakes, and that's how that culture then gets inculcated into the classrooms themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, to go back, if a teacher doesn't feel they belong, they don't feel safe, and they don't feel trusted, they're less likely, far less likely to be able to create that climate in the classroom. So, you know, big movement to think about, although obviously students come first and students really matter, but if we don't have our staff who feel that they belong and are trusted, you know, they're hardly likely to be able to communicate that to students. So we've got to look after staff to make sure that students are looked after. So shall we move on to the next one? The next thing that I've seen in leaders is a real ambition for everyone in the school to do well. Very, very high expectations and very high standards for students, for staff, and articulating those, communicating those so that everybody knows that, you know, high expectations here, we're all going to do well. So this ambition for everybody to do well is palpable in the good leader. And not only are they ambitious, but they absolutely enjoy the success of everybody. They celebrate that success. They genuinely feel joy when somebody does something really, really well. And that's just great. And that builds a culture of celebration. So I have come across leaders who don't want people to be more successful than them. And that's tough. And that's not a good leadership quality. I joke that, you know, my ambition for my organisation is to put my feet up and see my wonderful associates doing it a whole lot better than I ever did it. And people laugh, but I actually mean it. And, you know, to me, that's a really good future. So surrounding yourself as a leader with people, giving them, you know, real ambition and sharing how ambitious you are for them, and then loving it when they do well is very, very powerful. So the leader that is very ambitious but celebrates and experiences joy at people's success, very, very powerful.
That's great.
The third one, and this is all part of building safety and trust and a sense of belonging. The best leaders listen. They listen and they hear, and people feel that they are heard. So in order to listen carefully, the leader has to ask good questions. So they have to have good questions, and good questions don't always just pop into your head. So certainly, if I'm going into an interview or a coaching situation, I'll take time to prepare those good questions. What do I really want to know? What are the questions that are really going to enable the person to tell me what they feel or tell me their ideas or whatever? And it isn't enough just to ask the questions and look like you're listening to the answer. You have to really, really listen. So high quality listening skills, hearing, using that magic phrase, tell me more. And not enough to just say, oh, tell me more about that, but tell me more with a real sense of, I really, really want to hear what you're going to tell me. So tell me more. And the body language and the face show that you want to hear more. You really do want to listen and hear. Now, it isn't just about making people feel good. It's actually, it's a very good thing for leaders to do, because if people feel that they have been listened to, they're far more likely to go along with whatever. Even if a decision is taken after they have been listened to and they've had their say, even if that decision isn't quite what they would have liked, they're more likely to go along with it, to buy into the ultimate decision, because they feel like, well, I was heard, I had my say, you know, this time it didn't really go my way, but, you know, at least my leader listened to me. So very useful all round, but it's also a really good way of making people feel that they are valued, that their ideas are worthy, etc.
I remember, Karen, sorry.
No,
I remember attending a course that you delivered in Abu Dhabi 10 years ago. And one of the tools that you shared was the 5 whys tool. And I always found that to be quite a useful tool that leaders can use in digging deeper and getting to the root cause of what somebody was saying. So I still remember you sharing that, and it's had a big impact on the way that I've encountered, you know, in leadership training. So thank you for that.
Great. That's great. I mean, another thing is, and it's not my phrase, it's the phrase from Professor Vivienne Robinson, who's from a New Zealander, and she talks about having conversations which are open to learning conversations. Now, sometimes those might be tricky conversations that you're having, but if you you approach that conversation with a view that, you know, I'm going to learn here, I'm going to learn why this person is acting in this way, what this person thinks, what this person really feels, then that's a very good way to approach a conversation, recognizing that there is learning here. That, you know, if I'm going to display empathy, I need to really understand what's going on here for this individual. So listening and asking good questions. The magic phrase, tell me more, or why? Well, why was that? And digging deeper and deeper into it. I think it is a very useful skill for a leader to develop, and a quality for them to use throughout the school. Okay, shall we move on?
Yes, let's look at the 4th one.
The 4th one is that, and this might seem a bit strange to people, but what I'm going to say is that leadership is like parenthood. Now, again, this isn't an original thought from me. This comes from a leader called Bob Chapman, who is actually the leader of a huge engineering organization with multiple bases throughout the United States. And he was the first person that I heard say this, but the more that I've thought about it, I think it's a wonderful way for a leader to be. Now, I'm not in any way suggesting that leaders should treat their teams like children. That's not what this is about.
No. Yeah.
No. No, so that's not what is suggested. But that as a leader, to always treat your team as you would wish your children to be treated. So my children are grown up. My children are mature women, 2 daughters. But if I treat my team the way that I would want someone to treat my daughters, I think I'm probably going to be treating my team quite well. And I think it's a very useful check. As we're talking with our team, as we're working with our team, just to stop and think, is this how I would like my child, and probably an adult child, but is this how I would like my child to be treated? I think it works for parents of young children as well. And of course that goes into the classroom too. You know, one of my big questions when I have the privilege of being in a classroom is, would I like, well, it used to be my children, now it's would I like my grandchild to be in this class? And one of the things that, and I'm so fortunate because I often see outstanding teaching and learning. And one of the things I often say to a teacher if I've witnessed an outstanding lesson is, I wish you taught my grandchild. I wish my grandchild could have been in this class. And it's, I don't think you can say anything better to anybody really in terms of, I understand what an outstanding teacher you are. I can see that you might have 24 or 30 children in this class and you are doing your very best to maximise learning and progress for them all. Mind you, having just said that, I suppose in future we won't be having 30 children in the class, will we? Or maybe they will be socially distanced within that class. But anyway, to go back to this, leadership is like parenthood. And I think leadership is a privilege, just as working within education is a privilege. And if you have been given officially the privilege of leading people, then maybe you should just think like a parent and think about how you would want your child to be treated, and are you doing that? And I think that's quite a good check for people. Certainly one that, since I heard Bob Chapman talk about that, I've thought about it a lot. Just going back to Bob Chapman and the big engineering company in America, in 2008, his company suffered from the recession, like lots of people, and they had to lay people off. They couldn't afford them. But what he said was to the board, I don't want to lay anybody off. I want us all to be in this together. I don't want to pick people and say, you haven't got a job, go home and tell your family you haven't got a job. And so he came up with a plan that maybe if everybody took a little bit of a hit. And so he suggested that he would like everybody to take 3 weeks unpaid leave. And then nobody would perhaps have to be laid off, and they could get through it in that way. In fact, as he put that to people, he expected people to be, you know, a bit despondent and that morale would go down. And it didn't. People felt that they were protecting each other, that they had a sense of belonging, that they were in it together. And something happened that he hadn't expected. People started to trade these 3 weeks, and people who perhaps their families were grown and they could manage on less money would say to younger people, look, I'll take 4 weeks, so you don't have to take as many. I'll take one of your weeks for you. And they traded and worked things through. And morale went up because they were all aware that they were looking after each other. Very powerful. So Bob Chapman's book is called Everybody Matters, and that's another book that I would recommend if you're wanting to design a culture of belonging and good leadership. He has such good advice for people. Okay.
And I think we could maybe share with the viewers all these books that you are recommending, Karen, because sometimes you just don't know, you know, what is a good book and where to start. So these are great recommendations, and we will share this with our readers in the links to your session. Thank you for
Yes,
sharing that with us.
The books I recommend as well are always accessible and easy to read, because you know, if you get a rather dry book about perhaps the theory of leadership or whatever, I can't finish it myself, so I can't recommend it. So the books that I recommend are very readable and useful reads. Okay, so the next thing that I've identified is that great leaders give feedback effectively. If we go into classrooms and we ask students, even quite young children, who's the best teacher? You know, what makes a great teacher? One of the things that they often say, and it fascinates me because I do get the opportunity to say not who's your best teacher, but what's your best teacher like, you know, asking children about their learning. They say things like, my best teacher tells me how I'm doing. And I don't think leaders, and I'm generalising terribly here, but I don't think leaders tell people enough how well people are doing or how they are doing. So giving feedback effectively is very important, and there are considerations to be made about giving feedback effectively. Excuse me. There's a lot that we know about giving feedback effectively, and I think people don't always do it well. So it's something that very definitely can be a skill that is taught, and we can explore what works. So a very important piece of research into giving feedback was run in the United States years ago, and they found that if you, before you give feedback, you say something along the lines of, I'm giving you this feedback because I have very high expectations and I know you can achieve them, people will listen very carefully to that feedback. Now, we do know that oral feedback is more powerful than anything that's written or feedback that comes in any other way. So thinking about oral feedback, if we say that, I'm giving you this feedback because I have very high expectations and I think you can achieve them, we're giving clues about belonging and ambition and belief in an individual. So I think somebody's going to really listen to that feedback. So the feedback doesn't need to be all soft and fluffy and positive, because people sometimes think that, you know, they should be giving lots of positive feedback. I think you can then tell people that, and they will hear, yes, what they've done well, but also what needs to be done next. And sometimes you see advice that feedback should be sandwiched, something positive, something to develop, and then something positive. And I'm not a great fan of that, really, because I think feedback should be given. If we have something good to say, it shouldn't wait until we've got something bad to say so we can sandwich it. It should be given as and when. Just, you know, a simple word. It doesn't have to be a formal feedback session. But thank you for doing that very specific thing. It worked really well. I appreciated it. It made me feel better. The children loved it, or whatever it might be. So I think we need to give feedback as and when. And then when we do need to perhaps give feedback that is developmental, not to shy away from it, but to do it with openness so that people hopefully learn and want that feedback. Certainly when I've been led by leaders who give feedback well, it's really great. You miss it terribly when you haven't got it. One of the people that I really admire in terms of his educational philosophy is Ron Berger. So here's another book recommendation coming up, but Ron Berger, and he has quite a few things on YouTube. You could have a look at him. He has a brilliant way of giving feedback, which he uses with adults, but he also teaches the children in his schools. And he's got almost 70 schools in America and 1 or 2 in England. And he teaches people to give feedback. And he has 3 rules for feedback, which are so powerful. He says feedback should be kind, it should be specific, and it should be helpful. And I think if we give feedback that is kind, specific, and helpful, then that's going to be well received, particularly if it's prefixed by, I've got really high expectations and I think you can achieve them. I'm going to give you some feedback and it's going to be kind, specific, and helpful. Who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want to be developed and grown by a leader giving them feedback in that way? So
yeah, I actually saw a video of his where he with a butterfly, where
yes,
he actually works with his kindergarten. Yes.
Yes, he teaches children at a very young age to give feedback well, to critique each other's work. And that's the fundamental success of his schools, which are phenomenal. But he has a recent video out where he says he used to have 10 rules for giving feedback. He said, but nobody could remember them. So he was critiqued on his critiquing strategy, and he's brought it back to just 3: kind, specific, helpful. Just do those. Okay, so if we move on, all these the things that I've been talking about really come to this one. If you've got a sense of belonging and people feel safe and feel trusted, and you've got high expectations, you're ambitious for them, you're giving them feedback, what you're going to be able to do is to develop and challenge people to be the best that they can be. And that's what we want them to be. We want teachers to be the best teachers that they can be, and we want leaders to be the best leaders that they can possibly be. And I've chosen those words, develop and challenge, because sometimes, well, I think about my career, I had to be challenged to do things. One of the most effective leaders, wonderful leader that I was fortunate enough to work with in the early part of my career, challenged me to do things. And as she was telling me and explaining what she wanted me to do, I was thinking, I can't do that. And she would say, I think you can do it. Off you go, I'll support you, but you're going to do it. And that's an amazing way of stretching your comfort zone. We all know that we don't learn as much if we stay within our comfort zone, but learning happens somewhere outside the comfort zone. And then the comfort zone is stretched, and that becomes part of the comfort zone. But to develop people, to give them the opportunities to develop, to share, to collaborate, to inquire into what works in leadership and in the classroom, and then to challenge people to be the best that they can possibly be is what a great leader does, and does it for everybody on the staff. You know, the top leader does it by sharing their leadership and developing others so that they can actually be leaders for each team as you work through the school, and all staff are developed and challenged to be the best. So
this is a fantastic summary or a set of guidelines, Karen, that I think not only is applicable to leadership in schools, but in organizations, because all of these principles can be transferred into other areas of other careers, other professions. But at the same time, it also shows the teacher what leadership in the classroom should be, because all of those principles are going to impact on student outcomes if the teacher really lives and practices these values and these behaviors in the classroom. Yet it won't happen if leadership in the school is not inculcating that and modeling that and also demanding that in a way, you know. So it's really fantastically done. Thank you for sharing that.
It's a pleasure. So I thought it might be interesting for us to have a look at a great leader in action. Shall we have a quick look at a great leader in action? This might not be what you would expect. It's very hard to get a picture of a great leader in action, but I happen to have not a very high quality clip of video, but I think you could probably bear with me. It's a very short one. I think it's 1 minute 19 seconds, something like that.
Great.
But it says a great deal about safety, trust, ambition, and what a leader looks like. So it's not a school leader. It's actually a rock star leader. I guess everybody, wherever you are in the world, will have heard of Bruce Springsteen. And you might also know that his fans and his band call him the boss. And I believe that that's for good reason. Now, Bruce Springsteen typically plays a 4-hour set. He will send the band off to have a break, and he does an acoustic bit. He doesn't leave the stage. But I've captured here just the very end of probably a 4-hour concert gig that he did. And just watch how he leaves the stage. The boss in action. So maybe that's why they love him. A word for everyone. He must have been exhausted, but he leaves the stage last, and having thanked everybody individually. So I thought it might be worth just having a quick look at a good leader in action.
That's a really good example, you know, and acknowledging each person, each member of the band, showing them the appreciation, and usually you'll just see the star rushing off the stage. So it's a very good metaphor for good leadership.
Okay. So one other thing that I just wanted to touch on really, which is we talked about great leadership, but developing great teaching and focusing on the things that are really going to make a difference. And of course, in terms of school leadership, this is what we need to make sure we do. So just fairly quickly, I've identified 4 things that we know from research make a difference. So teachers' knowledge, making sure that teachers know and understand the curriculum content and pedagogy, so that their pedagogical skills are such that they can actually make sense of the content of the curriculum and deliver it in a way that's engaging and accessible to all learners. So a whole range of stuff around knowledge, which is both curriculum content and pedagogical knowledge. Excuse me. But, you know, we've talked about the great leaders make things safe and high expectations, and that's so important in the classroom, and we have evidence that it is. That the high expectations, we need to challenge learners. You mentioned earlier, Elmarie, we need a classroom climate where it's safe to make mistakes, but we also need a climate that challenges everybody. We should go for an 80% success rate for everybody, so that there's 20% of it that's really hard, and we have to struggle, and we have to, you know, find different ways of learning. Perhaps we have to learn with other students, whatever that might be. So there has to be challenge, because if it isn't challenging, learners are not doing as well as they could do. We should be making some mistakes, or we're not learning. I mentioned before, out of your comfort zone. That's where learning takes place, learning and development. And we should be thinking overall about students keeping up, not catching up. So we've really got to make sure that we support, that we give strategies to make sure that everybody can keep up, because it's harder to catch up than to keep up. So that the psychological classroom climate feeling of we're all keeping up rather than some trying to catch up. We need to focus on behaviours for learning, which, you know, I'm not talking here about discipline and sanctions. I'm talking about very positively explaining the behaviours that we need so that people can learn best, that learners can be self-evaluative. You mentioned Austin's butterfly and on Berger, teaching children how to critique each other's work. Yes, to critique each other's work to help them, and also to be able to critique their own and know where they're going next. So, of course, that depends on the teacher's pedagogy and showing them what a good one looks like, where we're going next, etc. But that children take responsibility for that, and children, even very young children, can be taught how to do that. And throughout, if we can be focused on the positive behaviours which help learning, we know that that makes a difference. And teaching people how to think, and we know the power of that. There's been a lot of research recently about thinking skills and the power of metacognition and helping people to think about thinking and make sure that we are teaching learners, not just passively rote learning, but we're actually teaching them to be critical, to make decisions, to work collaboratively and to move forward in that way. And then we're getting the best student outcomes we can possibly get. So I just thought it might be useful to take the great leadership into great teaching and thinking about what it is that we need to be doing in the classroom.
As a school leader, that's definitely also integral part of your work, is leading learning and ensuring that this is happening in the classroom. But these are great concepts that you've shared, and I think so helpful for people that are looking at how can we have cultures of learning that are really successful. Now, Karen, can I ask you, what about, maybe we should ask Quo Vadis. We've had the coronavirus, the COVID-19 crisis and pandemic, and schools have just been in disarray and disrupted. And do you think that we can ever go back to the way it was? And do you have any advice for schools that are now returning and have to sort of pick up the pieces? What should leaders do moving forward? I think everybody's wondering and struggling with that at the moment.
I mean, certainly recent news is that we're going to have to live with this pandemic for some time, probably quite a long time. So things are going to be different, aren't they? How different, I think, remains to be seen. If we had a crystal ball, it would be interesting to be able to do that. For me, and going back to the focus of this talk, is very much how are people going to manage professional learning? Because I think sometimes that's the first thing that gets clipped off when we're busy and when we're trying to manage groups, we're trying to perhaps have bubbles of students, and we're trying to work in a different way. The easiest thing to leave would be professional learning, and that's not going to be good in the short, medium, or longer term for the profession. So perhaps we should think about, you know, professional learning, professional development post-COVID, or, you know, maybe it's not post-COVID, maybe it's living with COVID rather than
living with it. Yes.
Yeah, living with it. I mean, we from the beginning of this, we've talked about the new normal and post-COVID, and I think perhaps we need to change that phrase to living with it. And how are we going to do that? So one of my concerns is that, you know, professional development is going to be different. I mean, I've spent the last 20 years, you know, how lucky am I, traveling around the world, to Abu Dhabi, to China, to, you know, the Philippines, to across Europe, to go to schools, to deliver professional development sessions, to facilitate professional learning. That's not going to happen in the future, partly because travel is restricted, but also because I think the profession have learned that remote learning and remote facilitation of learning is very possible. Look at the Inspired Conference, you know, we can do a global conference without being anywhere near each other necessarily. So it's certainly going to be different living with COVID. But thinking specifically about professional learning, who's going to facilitate it? And yes, we could do that remotely, but I'm really interested in helping schools to develop the capacity to deliver their own, to facilitate their own professional learning. Because one of the things we do know, that although leaders and outstanding teachers tend to do the same things, context is key. So sometimes I go to a school and talk about best practices, and staff would say, yes, but we couldn't do that here because, and they might say because we don't have the resources, or because our students are different, or because our students have different needs, whatever. So to me, the most powerful professional learning is school-based, and it's about what really makes a difference in that school. So not even necessarily about change, you know, less change and more improvement. Let's have a look at what we are doing, and let's see if we can improve what we're doing. And let's use research to see what are the things that we should be focused on, and do that in your own school. And I think that, you know, if we can build the capacity for that, that will be great. I think successful schools and schools that are going on to be successful living with COVID are going to embed coaching and mentoring as strategies. There's expertise in every school, and mentors can share that expertise. If we learn to coach and ask good questions, that's great. You don't have to be an expert at any particular thing to be a skilled coach and to ask those good questions. Remember back to when we said great leaders, they tell me more, and they prepare and ask good questions. And I think that that's going to be a skill set that needs to be further developed. Probably it's already in many schools, so we just need to develop it and give time for that to be totally embedded. And without a doubt, we know from lots and lots of research that the best professional learning is collaborative. Collective inquiry, collective expertise. You know, teachers know their own children, they know their own school, they know the resources, they know the context, they know the vision. So that's the most powerful thing. So for me, going on through COVID, collaborative school-based practice is going to be key, and developing that and making that as good as it can possibly be is the way forward. So we've got to make sure that it's embedded in what we do, not that we save it just for, you know, twice a year, but that it's something that happens. It's what we do. Not only do we work in the classroom, but we also work with colleagues to explore what works well and how we can improve what we're doing. And that's what I would like to see. So during COVID, where my team and I have not been travelling, and my team were all over the world, but what we've been trying to do is to think about these things and how can we help schools. So we decided that the best thing we could do, it's twofold really, give schools brilliant research-based information about what works best, and then help them build the skills to facilitate it for themselves. So that's really what we've been doing in the last few months, trying to work on that. So we've developed an online platform which will give people the opportunity to learn individually by studying online on a whole range of topics to do with classroom practice, to do with leadership, to do with business administration in a school, governance of a school. But then each of the modules we've done a facilitated version of as well, so that a school-based facilitator can say, well, I really found that useful working through that module on challenge or differentiation. I'd like to do that with my team. I'd like to share that so that we all know. And so we've tried to put on step-by-step guides for what you need to read, what you need to be aware of, what the research says, how you can best prepare for that. And then off you go with your own team.
And that is really building sustainable, a mechanism for sustainable development and growth. And, you know, whilst at the same time reducing your carbon footprint and acknowledging the difficulties that we are facing today in face-to-face teaching and facilitation and, you know, traveling to countries. We just don't know what the future holds. But also I think the model will be changing. I think schools might be changing to maybe a blended model, a reduced in-school presence model, because it is all possible. And all these questions that you've raised and all the characteristics of good leaders can be applied even in this blended world, right? So how do you create a culture where people feel they still belong, even though they are teaching remotely and working from their homes? How do we get our learners, even if they are remote and in their own homes, how do they feel a sense of belonging? How do we give good feedback online? How do we do professional learning? How do we inquire together? And all of this is, I think it's still all possible. Do you agree with me on that?
Without a doubt, yeah. I mean, having spoken on a regular basis with schools in Europe and across the world during the lockdown phase, I mean, some of the success stories, and I know as well from my own, I have 5 grandchildren who are school age, and they have been obviously homeschooled. And the things that have really made a difference are those calls where they've been with their class. Okay, they've had the advantage of having technology to access them, but you know, they've been excited that on Wednesday my class are all coming together, or you know, on Tuesday morning my teacher's going to call me at 10 o'clock and talk to me about my work that I did last week. And those are really, really powerful things, and we have the technology, we have the wherewithal. They also, there's evidence from the lockdown that staff have come closer together, even though physically they've been remote. One of the principals that I work with, a school in Switzerland, was speaking to me just the other day about how she wants to maintain the sense of team that she managed to create during lockdown by having a daily meeting where people dialed in at 7:45 each morning to just say, hi, is everybody okay? We're all set for the day. She said, we'd never done a daily briefing before in school. We were all in our own classrooms getting on for ready for the day. But coming together each morning in that way, just to check out and was everybody okay, she said really helped morale. And she said, I want to carry on with that as we get back into school and get back to whatever the future's going to hold. I want to maintain that high morale sense of team. We're in this together. So
and it brings us back to this, how you started this presentation, those 3 core questions. How does my leadership make people feel? And it's about human connection. It's about relationships. It's about the impact of your practicing metacognition yourself, thinking about, how are you thinking about leadership, and how are you approaching this? And regardless of what the current situation is, what the future brings, what the models of schools would be, your role as a leader will always be there, and you would still have these 3 fundamental things to think about. So that is a beautiful way of, I think, of a message of hope for school leaders as well, that things will still go on and models might change, but schools are not going to disappear. They might just look different from the way they look today. So thank you very much, Karen. You will be also sharing some information about your platform with the participants.
Yeah.
You have a link, and we will also make that link available. I must say, I've had a look at it, and it's fantastic. I wish, as a school principal, when I was a principal, that I had access to that. And it just shows that the future of learning is going to look different, but it's going to be much more accessible. And in this way, you can really reach people across the globe instead of getting on those planes, flying from east to west all the time.
Yes, so I don't have to spend as long in airports. As you said, it's good for the climate, for the planet. It's also economically, because schools are going to suffer economically in the short term or medium term, I would guess. So it's a good way. But the main reason is because if the thing that leaders do that is most important is develop others, and I do believe that, then here's a way of developing within your school, not just the leaders, but with everybody, developing people, building the capacity for them to teach others. I mean, it's very exciting to work with adults. It's a kind of privilege, but to work with a group of teachers who genuinely want to make a difference to the children in their charge, the young people within their charge. That's exciting. And, that's what we want. We want every child, every young person to be in a classroom with somebody who's excited about learning, don't we?
And that helps also to achieve the UN goal number 4, Sustainable Development Goal of quality education, because you can, through this kind of platform, give that outstanding quality of professional development that builds capacity within communities to deliver this, but at the same time that you are reducing that gap, and that people from across the world, doesn't matter whether they're in Africa, South America, Asia, can have access to high quality professional development. Karen, thank you so much for this really amazing talk and inspiring talk, and the practical information that you've shared. And I want to also encourage our participants to go on the conference app, the EdSpace app, and to talk about this. What are you going to do moving forward? How are you going to facilitate professional learning? Also reach out to Karen, and you can ask questions. You can, if you have any things that anything that she said that you'd like to have further discussions about. We really want to build an online community, and I'm sure that also you will be able to reach out to Karen. As I said, we will share information, contact information, and you can also participate in those online conversations. So Karen, thank you very, very much for this wonderful session, and we are really looking forward to seeing the impact of what you've shared today in the communities that will be participating in this conference.
Well, thank you, Elmer. It's always lovely to talk with you. We've spent many hours chatting, haven't we, about leadership learning and learning in general. And so it's been great to have the opportunity to talk with you today. And I look forward to being involved in the community. So perhaps if people have any comments or questions about, particularly about developing others, about professional learning for teachers, I shall look forward to being involved in some communication through the community. Do get in touch.
Thank you very much, Karen, and we will hopefully continue this conversation way beyond this conference. Thank you so much. It's lovely meeting you.